The most lethal armored vehicle Nazi Germany ever produced wasn't the legendary Tiger, it wasn't the Fiat Panther, it was something far uglier, far cheaper, and far more deadly. It stands barely 6 feet tall. It has no turret. It can't even rotate its gun more than 12 degrees in either direction. On paper, it's a death trap. A squat, slab-sided metal coffin on tracks that soldiers mocked for its looks, and commanders initially dismissed as a support weapon. Nothing more. But this ungainly slab of German engineering racked up a kill count that dwarfed every tank in the Wehrmacht's arsenal. This is the Sturmgeschütz III, the Stooge III, and it was a Sherman's worst nightmare. For thousands of Allied tankers rolling across Europe in their M4 Shermans, this squat little box was the last thing they never saw. Its secret wasn't speed. It wasn't armor. It was something far simpler and far more terrifying. You couldn't kill what you couldn't see. Picture a hedgerow in Normandy. A column of Shermans grinding forward through the bocage, hatches buttoned up, commanders scanning the tree line. And somewhere in the undergrowth, a barrel so low to the ground it's almost part of the earth itself. No turret silhouette breaking the horizon, no engine roar announcing its presence, just silence, patience, and a gun that could punch through everything the Allies were driving. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a vehicle that couldn't even rotate its gun became the deadliest tank killer of the Second World War. And you'll discover why its greatest advantage, the one thing that made it nearly invisible on the battlefield, was the same feature that everyone thought made it inferior. To understand how this ugly little vehicle became the deadliest weapon on tracks, we need to go back to where it all began, and to the problem it was never designed to solve. In the mid-1930s, German military doctrine faced a gap that no existing weapon could fill. Infantry needed direct fire support to crack fortified positions, bunkers, pillboxes, the kind of hardened strongpoints that artillery couldn't always reach in time. Towing field guns forward under fire was slow, exposed, and brutally costly in men. The concept that emerged was elegant in its simplicity: a fully armored, self-propelled assault gun. Something that could roll alongside the infantry and blast fortifications with high-explosive shells at close range, something protected enough to survive small arms fire and shrapnel while doing it. Erich von Manstein is often credited with championing this concept in a 1935 memorandum. His vision was specific and deliberate. He wanted battalions of assault guns embedded directly into infantry divisions, not controlled by the panzer arm, not answering to tank commanders. This doctrinal distinction matters enormously. The Stug was born as infantry's weapon, not a tanker's toy. It belonged to the artillery branch, crewed by artillerymen deployed at the discretion of infantry commanders. This wasn't a tank. It was never supposed to be a tank. It was a battering ram for the foot soldier, armored muscle to punch through what artillery couldn't reach. So why no turret? The answer came down to cost, profile, and manufacturing simplicity. A turret adds height, weight, complexity, and expense. By mounting the gun directly into a low, fixed superstructure, a casemate, engineers achieved three things simultaneously: a vehicle that was cheaper to build, harder to spot on the battlefield, and capable of mounting a larger gun than a turreted vehicle of the same weight class could carry. The chassis chosen was the proven Panzer III Ausführung F, reliable, widely available, already rolling off production lines in quantity. The official designation was Sonderkraftfahrzeug 142. The full technical name was a mouthful that no soldier ever bothered to use: Gepanzerte Selbstfahrlafette für 7.5 cm Sturmgeschütz 40. In the field, everyone simply called it the Stug. The original gun was the short-barreled 7.5 cm Stuke 37L24, a stubby weapon firing high-explosive shells, each round weighing 7 to 8 kilograms, along with heat rounds. Muzzle velocity sat at just 385 meters per second. It could demolish a bunker wall. It could flatten an infantry position. Against an enemy tank, that was someone else's problem. The Stug rolled off the line in 1940 with a gun designed to flatten buildings. Killing tanks was nowhere in the job description. The vehicle saw its first combat during the fall of France in 1940, where its infantry support role worked exactly as intended. Low profile, effective against fixed positions, easy to produce and maintain. Early variants, the Ausführung A through E, refined mechanical details but kept the same short-barreled gun and the same mission. No one in 1940 imagined this vehicle would become Germany's answer to the Sherman. No one imagined it would need to be. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. The Stug III entered the war as a hammer for cracking bunkers. Within 2 years, it would be forced to become something its designers never intended, a tank killer. And the reason for that transformation was rolling toward them across the Soviet steppe. What the Wehrmacht encountered in June 1941 changed everything, not just for the Stug, but for every armored vehicle Germany possessed. Look at the Stug III, and your first instinct is to call it ugly. Soldiers did. Allied troops did. Even the Germans who crewed it acknowledged it wasn't winning any beauty contests. Squat, slab-sided. A metal box bolted onto tank tracks with all the aesthetic grace of a garden shed someone welded a cannon to. But ugly had its advantages. Full dimensions tell the story. Length, 5.4 meters, width, 2.92 to 2.95 meters, and critically, height just 1.95 to 1.98 meters. Barely 6.5 feet tall. For comparison, an M4 Sherman stood well over 9 feet. The Stug could hide behind a hedgerow, a stone wall, a shallow rise in the ground that a Sherman would tower above like a barn on tracks. Combat weight ranged from 20.7 to 23.9 tons depending on the variant. Light enough for most bridges, most roads, most terrain that would bog heavier vehicles down to their belly plates. The turretless casemate defined everything about this vehicle. The gun sat in a fixed superstructure with only 24 degrees of horizontal traverse, 12 degrees to either side of center. To engage a target outside that narrow arc, the entire vehicle had to pivot on its tracks. This was its greatest weakness, and paradoxically, the source of its greatest strength. No turret meant a lower profile. No turret meant lower cost. No turret meant simpler manufacturing and faster production. And no turret meant the ability to mount a heavier gun than any turreted vehicle of the same weight class could carry. Armor protection on the early models started with 50 mm on the hull front, angled between 9 and 30 degrees. The superstructure front and gun mantlet matched at 50 mm. Sides and rear offered just 30 mm. The roof was a mere 10 mm. The belly, 15. But the Ausführung G, the variant that would define the Stug's legend, pushed frontal armor to 80 mm, enough to shrug off most Allied anti-tank rounds at combat range. And then there were the economics. At roughly 82,500 Reichsmarks per unit, the Stug cost less than the Panzer III it was based on, which ran about 103,000 Reichsmarks. Germany could build 5 Stugs for the cost of 2 Tigers. Over the course of the war, factories would produce more than 10,500 of them, outnumbering Tigers and Panthers combined. It was the cockroach of the Wehrmacht's armored fleet, cheap, low to the ground, and almost impossible to kill. And this is where the Stug story takes its most dramatic turn. June 1941, Operation Barbarossa. German forces pour across the Soviet frontier in the largest military invasion in human history. And for the first time they encounter something that throws their entire armored doctrine into crisis. The T-34 and the KV-1. These Soviet tanks are a profound shock. The T-34's sloped armor deflects rounds that should penetrate cleanly. The KV-1 is nearly impervious to standard German anti-tank guns at normal engagement ranges, and the short-barreled Stug III, designed to demolish bunkers and strongpoints, cannot reliably kill either of them. 385 meters per second of muzzle velocity simply doesn't generate enough kinetic energy to defeat sloped armor at any meaningful range. Imagine being a stooge crew, trained to support infantry assaults against fixed positions, suddenly face to face with a T-34 that your gun can barely scratch. The vehicle you're sitting in was never designed for this fight, but the fight has come to you, and the T-34 doesn't care about your original job description. The response was rapid and transformative. The Ausführung F received the longer 7.5 cm Stug 40L-43 in 1942, a dramatic improvement in muzzle velocity and armor penetration. Then, from December 1942, the Ausführung G, the definitive variant, mounted the even more capable L-48. This gun matched the Panzer IV Ausführung H's firepower round for round. The Stooge was no longer an infantry support weapon in anything but name. It was a tank destroyer. The ultimate variant combined the low profile and ambush potential of the original design with a gun that could kill anything the Allies and Soviets were fielding. The vehicle that was never supposed to fight tanks was now Germany's most efficient tank killer. The doctrinal shift was equally dramatic. Post-1942, Stug 3 battalions were increasingly assigned defensive roles, deployed as mobile anti-tank reserves to blunt Allied and Soviet armored thrusts. They were embedded in infantry divisions, exactly as Manstein had originally envisioned, but now their mission had been completely rewritten. Not bunkers, tanks. The T-34 didn't just shock the German army. It rewrote the Stooge 3's entire reason for existing. But firepower alone doesn't explain what made this vehicle so lethal. The real secret was something you can't measure in millimeters of penetration. The gun was ready. The doctrine had shifted. Now it was time to see what the Ausführung G could do on the battlefield, and for the men inside it, that meant learning a completely different way to fight. Step inside, and the first thing you notice is how cramped it is. 4 men sealed into a steel box. Commander, gunner, loader, driver. No turret means no turret basket, no rotating periscope sweep of the horizon. The commander relies on a limited-view periscope to observe the battlefield and often has to crack his hatch open a few inches to get any real situational awareness, exposing his head to sniper fire, mortar fragments, and shell splinters. It's a calculated risk that commanders make dozens of times per engagement, and it gets some of them killed. Behind the crew compartment, the Maybach HL-120 TRM V12 gasoline engine rumbles and vibrates through every surface. 300 horsepower, giving 12.6 to 13.5 horsepower per ton. Top speed on a decent road, 40 kilometers per hour. But sustained speed in real conditions drops to about 24. Cross-country, through mud, snow, or broken ground, it crawls at 10 to 12 kilometers per hour. Range is limited, 155 kilometers on road, dropping to just 95 off-road. Every engagement has to be planned with fuel in mind. You don't waste fuel chasing targets. You pick your position and let the targets come to you. The suspension runs on 6 paired rubberized road wheels on torsion bars, with front drive sprockets, and rear idlers riding on standard Panzer III tracks. Ground pressure sits at 0.9 kilograms per square centimeter, low enough for reasonable performance on soft ground. It can cross a 2.5-meter trench, ford 0.8 meters of water, climb a 0.6-meter step, and handle a 30-degree gradient. Not a race car by any stretch, but nimble enough to reposition between ambush sites before the enemy can react. Now, here's what most people get wrong about this vehicle. They focus on the gun and the armor, and miss the critical vulnerability. No secondary armament as standard. Most Stug 3s went into combat without a machine gun. Some late-model Ausführung Gs received a shield-mounted MG-34 for close defense, but the majority of crews had nothing to fight off infantry with, except their sidearms and grenades lobbed from the hatches. If enemy soldiers got close, particularly infantry armed with anti-tank grenades, sticky bombs, or Molotov cocktails, the crew was in desperate trouble. Later in the war, 8mm spaced armor skirts were bolted to the sides at 30-degree angles. Designed specifically to defeat tungsten core armor-piercing rounds and anti-tank rifle fire that could punch through that thin 30mm side armor, but against determined infantry at close range, the Stooge remained vulnerable. If this sounds like a death trap, you're not wrong, unless the crew knew exactly what they were doing. And the crews who survived learned a very specific way of fighting. The Stooge's limitations, no turret, limited traverse, no machine gun, dictated a doctrine that was ruthlessly focused. Ambush, fire, relocate. Never engage in the open. Never chase a retreating enemy. Never, under any circumstances, allow yourself to be flanked. Every engagement followed the same pattern. The crew selects a position with clear fields of fire covering a road, a valley, an approach route, and critically, a pre-planned escape route behind them. The driver reverses into a hull-down spot, using terrain to hide the hull, while leaving the gun and sighting equipment just barely above the crest. That impossibly low silhouette means the Stooge can shelter behind terrain features that would leave a Sherman's entire turret exposed. A gentle ridge, a stone wall, a hedgerow. Features that wouldn't hide a bicycle from a Sherman commander become perfect concealment for the Stug. The gunner peers through his sight, range markers calibrated, moving target reticle ready for lead calculation. They wait, engine at idle, no movement, no radio chatter. The silence before the kill stretches into minutes that feel like hours. When the target appears, a Sherman column, an armored patrol, a cluster of vehicles funneling through a choke point, the gunner has seconds to acquire, aim, and fire before the enemy can react. The first shot is everything. If it hits, the Stug reverses out of position immediately, backs down the escape route, relocates to the secondary position, and sets up again. If it misses, the crew has to pivot the entire vehicle to re-engage, and those seconds of vulnerability, tracks grinding, engine roaring, silhouette briefly exposed, can be fatal. The Stug didn't fight like a tank. It fought like a sniper, patience, concealment, one perfect shot, then vanish. But the real question isn't whether the Stug could kill a Sherman, it's how many it could kill before the Sherman even knew it was there. By 1944, the Western Front is dominated by the M4 Sherman, the backbone of American and British armored forces. The Sherman is numerous, reliable, mechanically sound, easy to repair, and available in staggering quantities. But it has a problem that no amount of reliability can solve. Armor. The M4's frontal hull armor is 50mm, the turret front 75. Even factoring in the slope of the glacis plate, this is thin by 1944 standards, and rolling through the bocage country of Normandy, through dense hedgerows and sunken lanes with visibility measured in dozens of meters, Shermans are entering exactly the kind of terrain where the Stug III was born to kill. Just how easily could a Stug III destroy a Sherman? The numbers are shocking, and we'll get to them. But first, understand this. Every advantage the Sherman possessed, its turret, its speed, its numbers, was neutralized by the terrain and the tactics the Stug was built to exploit. What happened next turned the Stug from a battlefield tool into a legend. The Sherman crews rolling into France had no idea what was waiting for them in the hedgerows, so let's break it down. Gun against armor, Stug against Sherman. The numbers and the reality are devastating. A Stug III Ausführung G sits dug into a hull-down position at the edge of a Norman hedgerow. It is late June 1944. The bocage stretches in every direction, dense walls of ancient hedgerow lining sunken lanes, choking off lines of sight, channeling movement into narrow corridors that might as well have been designed as kill zones. The earth is damp. Inside the casemate, the smell of wet soil mingles with engine oil and cordite residue from earlier engagements. The low vibration of the idling Maybach hums through the steel floor and into the bones of the four-man crew. The gunner's eye is pressed to the ZF-1 sight. The reticle is steady, range markers calibrated to 1,500 meters, with the moving target reticle ready for lead calculation against anything crossing his field of view. The commander has his hatch cracked open 2 inches, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the lane that runs northeast through a gap in the hedgerows. From 500 meters out, the Stug is indistinguishable from the hedgerow itself. There is no turret silhouette breaking the natural line of the vegetation. No barrel protruding above the foliage at an unnatural angle. Just green shadow and the faint geometric edge of something that doesn't quite belong, but that you'd have to know exactly where to look to find. Then the sound. Sherman engines. The distinctive grinding clank of American tracks on packed earth, growing louder. The column is approaching on the narrow lane, 3 Shermans in line, flanked on both sides by hedgerows they cannot see over or through. The range closes. The gunner's thumb rests on the firing mechanism. The loader has already rammed a 7.5-centimeter armor-piercing capped ballistic capped round into the breech and stepped clear. The commander whispers the range. 400 meters, 350, 300. The lead Sherman fills the sight picture. The crack of the L-48 splits the morning air, sharp, flat, the sound echoing off the hedgerow walls. The round crosses 300 meters in a fraction of a second and strikes the lead Sherman in the hull front. The vehicle lurches to a halt. Smoke pours from the driver's hatch. In a fraction of a second, the engagement was decided. The loader is already slamming the next round home. The second shot hits the third Sherman in the column, blocking the lane from both directions. Wreckage forward, wreckage behind. The middle Sherman's turret is spinning, the crew desperately searching for a target they cannot identify. 2 Shermans are burning before the third crew even knows which direction the fire is coming from. But survival has a clock, and it's already ticking. The surviving Sherman's gunner spots the faint haze of the muzzle flash against the hedgerow. The turret swings. The 75-millimeter barrel is coming around toward the Stug's position. The commander sees it and gives the order. The driver throws it into reverse, the tracks biting into soft earth, the vehicle lurching backward down the hedgerow lane toward the pre-planned secondary position 50 meters behind them. The gun that couldn't chase you means the Stug cannot track the Sherman as it reverses. If they stay, they die. The turretless design that made them invisible now makes them vulnerable. They vanish behind the hedgerow line as the Sherman's round tears through branches where they sat 3 seconds earlier. Now, let the penetration data settle for a moment, because the numbers explain why those 2 Shermans never had a chance. The Stug's 7.5-centimeter Stuke 40L48 firing standard armor-piercing capped ballistic capped ammunition penetrates 145 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor at 10 meters. At 100 meters, 143 millimeters. At 500 meters, the typical bocage engagement range, 130 millimeters. At 1,000 meters, 116. At 1,500, 104. At 2,000 meters, still 93 millimeters of penetration. The Sherman's frontal hull armor is 50 millimeters. Its turret front, 75 millimeters. Even accounting for the slope of the Sherman's glacis plate, which increases the effective thickness, the Stug's standard round punches through it cleanly at well over a kilometer. At 500 meters, the Stug has nearly double the penetration needed to defeat the Sherman's frontal armor. Double. The round doesn't just go through, it goes through with 80 millimeters of surplus penetration energy, enough residual force to devastate everything inside the fighting compartment. Armor-piercing composite rigid rounds, the tungsten core ammunition reserved for the hardest targets, push the figures even further. 182 millimeters at 10 meters, dropping to 107 at 2,000. Against a Sherman, this is catastrophic overkill, a sledgehammer against a window. And then there are the shaped charge rounds, 80 millimeters of penetration at any range, regardless of distance. Slower velocity, harder to aim precisely, but at close range under 200 meters, they guarantee penetration against the Sherman's flanks and rear armor. The math was merciless. Paper armor meets a purpose-built killer. At any range where a competent crew could aim, The round was going through the Sherman. Front, side, rear, it barely mattered. The Sherman's armor, adequate against Japanese anti-tank guns and Italian light tanks, was tissue against the L-48. A Stug crew with a clear shot at a Sherman was holding a death sentence. The Sherman crew, facing a hidden Stug, was holding nothing at all. But the penetration tables don't tell the whole story. A Sherman has something the Stug does not: a turret that rotates 360 degrees and the tactical intelligence to use it. A Sherman has speed, numbers, and doctrine built around combined arms cooperation. A single Stug can be flanked, surrounded, overwhelmed by coordinated movement. And the 30mm side armor, the same side armor that needed spaced skirts for protection, is thin enough for a Sherman's 75mm gun to punch through at almost any combat range. One flanking Sherman is all it takes. The Stug's armor was a fortress from the front and a coffin from the side. Every engagement was a race. Could the Stug kill enough Shermans before one of them got around its flank? Return now to the tactical reality that made the Stug so effective despite every limitation. That vehicle, barely 6 feet tall, with no turret, no machine gun, and a gun that could look only 12 degrees to either side, should have been a liability. Instead, it was a nightmare. The reason was concealment, pure and merciless. In prepared positions, in the bocage, in the forests of the Ardennes, on the snow-covered steppes of the Eastern Front, Stugs disappeared into the landscape with a completeness that no turreted tank could match. A tiger announces itself. The massive silhouette, the long overhanging barrel, the engine roar that carries for a kilometer. Everything about a tiger screams presence. A panther is visible from a mile away on flat ground. The Stug is the hedgerow. It is the snowdrift. It is the shadow at the tree line that doesn't move until the killing moment. Now consider the psychological impact on the Sherman crews. You are rolling forward through bocage country. Visibility is 30 meters, maybe 50. You can see nothing but walls of green vegetation on either side. Then the tank to your left explodes. A jet of flame, black smoke spiraling upward, the crack of the shot arriving after the impact. Then the one behind you. You spin your turret, searching. Where? The muzzle flash was there, maybe, behind that hedgerow, but now there's nothing. No silhouette, no movement. The Stug has already reversed into new cover, and you are sitting in the middle of a kill zone with no target to shoot at, and no idea if the next round is already aimed at you. The doctrine of ambush warfare meant Stug crews dictated the terms of every engagement they initiated. They chose when, they chose where, they chose how. In defensive operations, which dominated Germany's war from 1943 onward, this combination of concealment, firepower, and tactical patience was devastating. The Stug didn't need a turret because it never intended to fight fair. It chose its ground, chose its moment, and by the time you saw it, you were already dead. But the vehicle that was invisible on the ground was naked from the sky, and as Allied air power grew to overwhelming dominance, the Stug's hunting ground began to shrink. P-47 Thunderbolts and Typhoons prowled above the Normandy countryside, hunting for anything that moved on roads or in clearings. The Stug's roof armor, just 10 millimeters thick, offered no protection against aircraft-delivered rockets, bombs, or strafing runs. Daylight movement on open roads became suicidal. Concealment worked against ground-level observers, but from 2,000 feet up, a Stug sitting in a field was just another target waiting to burn. But the Western Front was only half the story. On the Eastern Front, where the majority of Stugs fought and died, the scale of combat dwarfed anything in France or Belgium. Here the Stug didn't set up lone ambushes in hedgerows. It anchored desperate defensive lines, fought rearguard actions across hundreds of kilometers of retreat, and faced Soviet armored offensives that threw hundreds of T-34s and IS-2s at German positions in a single day. The vehicle born from the shock of the Eastern Front now faced the descendants of those same tanks in staggering, overwhelming numbers. Stug battalions became the backbone of anti-tank defense for infantry divisions, that had no panzer support, no Tiger battalions, nothing but 4 men in a steel box waiting for the Soviet tide to reach their position. The creak of frozen steel in Russian winter, breath crystallizing inside the fighting compartment. The rumble of approaching T-34 columns felt through the frozen ground before the sound reached human ears. For every Stug that survived to ambush another day, 3 were burning on the steppe. The production numbers, the most produced armored vehicle in the German arsenal, reflected not abundance but desperation. Germany built so many because Germany lost so many. The attrition was relentless. Experienced crews were killed, wounded, captured. Replacements arrived with weeks of training instead of months. The vehicle was mechanically reliable, the gun was devastating, the doctrine was sound, but none of it mattered without the men who could execute it. The Stug's greatest weapon was never the gun, it was the crew, and by the war's final year, that weapon was running out. By late 1944 and into 1945, Stugs were everywhere, filling gaps in depleted panzer divisions, assigned to Volksgrenadier units scraped together from the remnants of shattered formations, pressed into roles they were never designed for. Urban combat, hasty counterattacks, meeting engagements in open terrain where ambush tactics were impossible, dust, rubble, chaos. Stripped of its ambush doctrine, the Stug was just a box with a gun. No turret means death in a swirling street fight where threats come from every direction simultaneously. No machine gun to fall back on when infantry close in from alleyways and upper floors. The thin side and rear armor means even a handheld rocket launcher can kill it at close range. Boxes don't survive street fights. But even in these desperate conditions, individual crews achieved remarkable results through sheer skill and determination. The vehicle's reliability and the staggering numbers still in service meant it was present at nearly every major engagement of the war's final year, from the Ardennes to Budapest to the defense of Berlin itself. When the final tallies were counted, the numbers told a story that no one, least of all the vehicle's original designers, could have predicted. The Stug III destroyed more enemy tanks than any other German armored vehicle in the Second World War. Let that claim sit for a moment, because it inverts everything popular culture has taught you about German armor. This vehicle, cheaper than the tank it was built on, with no turret and no machine gun, outperformed the Tiger, the Panther, the Panzer IV, every vehicle that was supposed to be Germany's primary answer to Allied armor. The ugly duckling of the Wehrmacht's armored fleet turned out to be its deadliest predator. Not through brute force, not through technological superiority, but through doctrine, concealment, and a gun that never needed to be anything more than good enough at the right moment. Those numbers carry weight beyond statistics. Each Stug carried 4 men. Across more than 10,000 vehicles, that represents over 40,000 crewmen who fought inside these steel casemates. Many did not survive. The attrition rate, particularly on the Eastern Front, was staggering. Young men who learned to read terrain like snipers, read wind, who could identify a T-34 variant by the sound of its engine, who knew exactly how many seconds they had to fire and reverse before a return shot found them. The war ends, and a surviving commander returns to a Germany that no longer exists, as he knew it. Cities in rubble, the nation divided. The skills that kept him alive, patience, concealment, the ability to kill from hiding, are useless in peace. He carries the knowledge of what he did inside a steel box, and the memory of the crews who didn't come back for the rest of his life. On the other side of the equation, an American tanker who survived a Stug ambush in Normandy. His Sherman hit from a position he never identified, the round punching through the hull before anyone in the crew heard the shot. 2 of his crewmates killed instantly. He escaped through the turret hatch into a ditch, ears ringing, uniform smoldering. He spent the rest of the war flinching at every hedgerow, every tree line, every shadow that might conceal a barrel barely 6 feet off the ground. The invisible enemy that struck without warning became the recurring nightmare of men who survived the bocage. And then there were the infantry, the men who fought alongside Stugs, and the men who fought against them. For German Lancers, The Stug was a lifeline. When no panzers were available, when the division had nothing heavier than machine guns and mortars, the arrival of a Stug battery meant survival. Mobile firepower that could stop a tank assault, break up an infantry concentration, buy time for a withdrawal. For Allied infantry, it was a hidden menace that could materialize from any fold in the terrain, any barn, any tree line, deliver a devastating blow, and vanish. Both sides learned to respect what this vehicle could do, and to fear the moment when it appeared without warning. After the war, captured Stugs were evaluated by Allied technical intelligence teams. The verdict was grudging respect. Nothing about the vehicle was individually revolutionary. The gun was good but not extraordinary. The armor was adequate but not exceptional. The chassis was reliable but not innovative. What made the Stug devastating was the combination: low cost, low profile, adequate firepower, and sound tactical doctrine, all integrated into a package that could be mass-produced and crewed by artillerymen rather than scarce-trained tankers. The sum was catastrophically greater than its parts. Yet, in popular memory, the Stug III was overshadowed almost immediately. The Tiger became the icon of German armored power, the star of documentaries, movies, and video games for decades to come. The Panther drew admiration for its sleek lines and powerful gun. These were vehicles that were rarer, more expensive, and far more mechanically troubled than the Stug. But they looked the part. They looked dangerous. They looked like what a tank was supposed to look like. The ugly vehicle that actually won Germany's armored engagements was forgotten in favor of the photogenic failures. History remembers the Tiger. The battlefield feared the Stug. The Stug proved a principle that armies would debate for decades after the war, that a well-designed, doctrine-optimized vehicle, purpose-built for a specific tactical role, can outperform a technologically superior machine that tries to do everything. The concept of the turretless tank destroyer, cheap, low, specialized, disciplined in its limitations, influenced post-war armored vehicle design in nations from Sweden to the Soviet Union. The vehicle that rewrote its own job description demonstrated something that no specification sheet can capture. Adaptability, not raw capability, determines a weapon's ultimate value. But the Stug story doesn't end with the war. Its legacy and the lessons it taught echo far beyond 1945. The Stug III suffered the opposite of mythologization. It was forgotten, while the Tiger tank became the default image of German armored power in popular consciousness, appearing in film after film, game after game, documentary after documentary. The Stug, the vehicle that actually destroyed more enemy tanks, faded into the footnotes. The reason is almost absurdly simple. It was ugly. It didn't look like a tank, and its greatest tactical asset, its ability to be invisible, made it cinematically worthless. A Tiger charging across an open field with its long 88mm barrel leading the way makes spectacular footage. A Stug sitting perfectly still behind a hedgerow, invisible to everyone until the instant it fires, makes terrible television. You can't build a movie climax around something the camera can't find. The Stug's effectiveness was its own enemy in the court of public memory. You can't mythologize what you never saw. Surviving Stug IIIs can be found in military museums around the world today. Many were recovered from bogs, forests, and riverbeds on the Eastern Front, decades after the war ended. Each one is a time capsule. The rusted steel still bearing the marks of the crew who fought inside it, the dents where rounds struck and failed to penetrate, the scorch marks where rounds struck and did. We started with a question: how did the ugliest vehicle in the Wehrmacht become its deadliest? Now you know. It wasn't about beauty. It wasn't about brute force or wonder weapon technology. It was about a simple design insight that proved more powerful than any engine, any gun, any thickness of armor plate. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy can't see. A vehicle so low it merged with the earth, a gun powerful enough to kill anything it faced, and a doctrine that turned every hedgerow, every ridge, every shadow into a potential kill zone. The ultimate irony is inescapable. The Stug III was designed to help infantry attack fortified positions. It ended up saving them in desperate defense. It was built to destroy bunkers with high explosive shells. It became the war's most prolific tank killer. Everything about its ultimate role was accidental, except the killing. The age of the assault gun ended with the war, but the principle that a cheaper, simpler, better-hidden weapon can defeat a more powerful one on ground of its choosing, that principle is eternal. If this story changed how you think about armored warfare, subscribe for more deep dives into the weapons and battles that shaped the modern world. 10,000 Stug rolled off German production lines between 1940 and 1945. Most were destroyed. Many were forgotten. But in every hedgerow ambush, every desperate defensive stand, every Sherman that exploded without warning from a direction no one could identify, the same truth held. The deadliest weapon on the battlefield was never the biggest, the fastest, or the most beautiful. It was the one you never saw coming.